Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true, disturbing stories about creepy neighbors in Appalachia. From people who moved to quiet, forgotten towns, only to discover that their neighbors were hiding something deeply unsettling. But before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now let's start. I was 13 when we moved to a place called Granger Hollow. It barely deserved the name town. One of those backwoods spots in southern Appalachia where the trees outnumber the people 10 to 1. The biggest landmark was a half-collapsed gas station with a single pump and a soda machine that only took quarters. The population was just under 300. That was if you counted pets and whatever lived under the floorboards of the church. We weren't moving there for fun. My dad had just inherited an old, leaning farmhouse from his uncle Jasper. I'd only ever seen Jasper in one faded photo, wearing a cap and holding a trout. We hadn't heard from that side of the family in years. Then suddenly, this house just fell into Dad's lap. We were broke enough to see it as a gift. Mom called it a fresh start. Dad called it free land. I didn't call it anything, but my gut was uneasy before we even packed the first box. The house looked like it had been losing an argument with the weather for 30 years. Sagging porch, moss on the roof, paint peeling down to gray, the kind of place that creaks even when nobody's inside. But it had 4 walls, and it wasn't in foreclosure, so we moved in. The quiet hit me first. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. Like it was hiding something. No passing cars, no lawnmowers, no radios drifting from windows. Sometimes, not even birds. It was like the whole place held its breath whenever we stepped outside. Our nearest neighbors lived across a scraggly patch of weeds and broken fence posts. Their house looked worse than ours, if that was possible. Big and crooked, shutters warped, porch tilted so far it seemed like it might peel off and walk away. I remember wondering how it was still standing. A brother and sister lived there. I never caught their last name. Nobody offered it. The woman wore her gray hair in a single stiff braid, like it hadn't been undone in years. She always had on the same faded dress and apron stained from decades of spills. Her brother was heavy-set. He shuffled more than he walked, dragged along like something unseen was pulling him. When he looked at you, it was still, expectant, like he was waiting. For what, I never knew. They never spoke first, never waved, just watched. The mailman, one of the only people who actually talked to us, told my dad they'd been here since the flood back in the 50s. They've seen this town go under and come back meaner, he said. Then he lowered his voice. Folks around here don't ask too many questions. I'd advise the same. A week after we moved in, Dad asked me to return a hammer he'd borrowed from them. He tossed it to me, casual, like it was no big deal. But the second I stepped into their yard, my stomach twisted. Their gravel path crunched under my shoes, louder than it should have. The world around me went silent again, like even the wind had stepped aside to let me pass. I was about to knock when the door creaked open. She was already standing there, the sister, apron on, hands hidden out of sight. She stared at me, then said, flat as stone, "Oh, it's the new girl." I held up the hammer, trying to keep my hand steady. She didn't take it. Her eyes flicked toward our house. "You tell your daddy not to dig too deep," she said. "That land remembers." I didn't ask what she meant, didn't even say goodbye. I set the hammer on the porch rail and walked back, not running, not hurrying. Just steady, like running might invite something to follow. That night, I woke to tapping. Light, measured. It came from under my bed. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, listening. 8 taps. Pause. 8 more. Like it was waiting for me to count along. In the morning, there were scratches on the front door. Not claws, not deep. Thin, almost delicate. Like a child dragging their fingers over and over. Dad said it was raccoons. I didn't argue. But I knew better. Then things began to move. Mom lost her baking tins. We found them later in the shed, stacked neatly. Each one filled with dried leaves, bones, and twine soaked in oil. My algebra book disappeared. A week later, it turned up under the porch, swollen with damp, stinking of vinegar. The garden we just planted went limp overnight. Leaves blackened, boiled looking. The scarecrow in Dad's old flannel collapsed into a wet pile. Like it had melted. I told Dad. He said houses creak, books fall, animals dig, wind blows. Then one evening, I saw the brother. He stood at the edge of the cornfield just beyond the light, mouth moving, no sound. I could tell he wasn't talking to me. He stared at our house until the shadows swallowed him whole. And then Mom's brakes failed. One moment she was driving to the store, the next she was in a ditch. Car twisted but not destroyed. She crawled out with a cut on her arm, shaking. The mechanic said the brake line was sliced clean, no rust. No wear, just cut. Dad brought the shotgun to the door. A week later, they brought us a pie. The sister stood on our porch, smiling faintly. "We're praying for your wife," she said, holding out the pie like a peace offering. It smelled sweet cloves, sugar, honey, and something earthy. Dad waited until she was gone. Then he dropped it straight in the trash. That night, the scratching returned. Not under the floor. Inside the walls. Close. I pressed my ear to the drywall. Something was pacing, not an animal. Not unless raccoons had learned how to whisper. We called the sheriff. He searched every inch. Attic, crawl space, under the porch. Nothing. Before he left, he leaned toward Dad's window. "Don't poke the quiet ones, sir," he said. "This town learned to leave them be." Neither of us slept that night. Then we found our dog, nailed to a tree. No fight, no blood, eyes open, body posed. That was it. Dad started packing. We were leaving, no debate. But when we tried the car, it was dead. Lug nuts gone. All 4 tires loose. So we decided to walk. By sunrise, we were on the road. But a mile out, we stopped. Furniture blocked the path. Chairs, tables, broken cribs, cracked mirrors, stacked into a barricade. Nailed to the top were sheets of paper, our names written across them. Mine, Mom's, Dad's. We turned back. That night, we locked everything. Windows, doors, even the attic hatch. But sometime past midnight, I heard footsteps above us. Soft, careful. I took the flashlight and climbed. Every stair groaned like a warning. In the center of the attic floor sat a doll. Not just any doll. It had my face. Stitched features, rough but unmistakable. My braid, my hoodie, shrunk and sewn around its cloth frame. It sat upright, hands folded, mouth sewn shut. The next morning, the sheriff's cruiser was in our drive. Engine cold, doors shut, keys still in the ignition, but no sheriff. On the passenger seat, a note, "Let it finish." That afternoon, we heard the brother had died. Heart failure, they said. But that evening, the sister came to our door, her apron dotted red, braid half undone. Her voice was thin. "He was supposed to last 10 more years, she whispered. "He wasn't ready. I'll have to bind it again." Dad slammed the door before she could say another word. That night, we gathered every handmade thing we owned. Dolls, trinkets, the clay mug from the kitchen. Even the fern none of us remembered buying. We tossed it all into the fireplace, and we watched it burn. The scratching stopped. Weeks later, a man from Dad's old job helped us get the car running. We left before dark. No goodbyes. We've never been back. I was 19 when I moved into a duplex at the far edge of a tiny town called Elbridge. It sat right where the paved roads gave up and the woods started closing in. The road to get there was barely a road, more like a stubborn dirt path that looked like it used to be something, then gave up halfway. Trees arched over it, thick and close, and most days I had to slow down to a crawl just to keep my car from scraping underneath. By the time I reached the place, it felt like I had left regular life behind completely. The duplex stood alone at the end of that stretch, half hidden by overgrown brush. It sagged like it hadn't had any reason to stay upright in years. My half wasn't great, but it was livable if you squinted. The paint was peeling. The steps creaked. The kitchen sink had a habit of groaning every time I used it. But I was 19, broke, and trying to make it through the first months of adult life without crashing. So I told myself it was fine. The other half belonged to the Greshams. No one ever used their first names. Just the Greshams, like they came as a set, and you didn't question the packaging. In a town that small, people usually filled you in on the locals right away, who runs the diner, who gives the best car deals, who to avoid. When it came to the Greshams, the only thing anyone ever said was, "They keep to themselves." That was putting it mildly. Mr. Gresham never spoke. I mean that literally. In all the months I lived there, not once did I hear his voice. He just stood on the porch for long stretches, not smoking, not drinking, just standing. His mouth hung slightly open, like he was trying to taste something in the air. His eyes never settled where you expected. They darted just a little past everything. Mrs. Gresham was the talkative one, if you could call it that. She never said more than a few words at a time, usually just muttering to herself while she collected the mail or watered a row of dead-looking plants in their side yard. She always looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. Her mouth stayed tight, like she was chewing on words that refused to be spoken. Every window on their side of the duplex was sealed with tinfoil. Not taped around the edges, but folded and pressed until it looked melted into the frame. No light went in. No light came out. At night, though, I sometimes caught a faint flicker behind the foil. Like candlelight or an old lantern, it pulsed slowly, like it was breathing. Even in those late July heat waves, when I was sweating through 2 fans and an open window, the Greshams kept every opening sealed, doors shut, windows locked. Not so much as a screen cracked open. And I never once heard an air conditioner running on their side. Still, I tried to mind my business. It was easier that way. But things started getting strange, and I couldn't ignore it for long. It started with the knocking, not banging, not even knocking on a door. This was tapping, light, precise. It came from the wall we shared, my bedroom against whatever was on their side. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or pipes doing that clanking thing for no reason. But it wasn't random. It began around 12:30 every night. 3 taps, pause, pause, 5 taps, pause, pause, 2, then again, 3, 5, 5, 2. I would lie there frozen in bed, counting them like I could make sense of it if I listened long enough. 3, 5, 2, then again. It was too specific to be nothing, but too quiet to call anyone about. That's how it starts. You tell yourself it's probably nothing. You just need more sleep. A lot of weird things feel less weird in daylight. Until they don't. A few days later, I started waking up even earlier, just before sunrise. Every time, without fail, I was jolted awake by the sound of birds. Not chirping, not morning songs. Crows, loud, loud, angry, endless. The first screech would echo through the trees, then another, then dozens. They circled low over the roof, sometimes close enough that their wings looked like they might hit the siding. But they never landed on my side, only the Greshams. They clawed at the shingles, stomping like they were trying to get in. The noise was unbearable. Not just loud, but sharp, like it was meant to drill into your skull. Then, as soon as the sun rose above the tree line, they vanished. Gone. I asked the landlord about it once. Bill, big guy, with the beard that made him look like he'd been chopping wood since birth. I caught him behind the bait shop he ran out near the main road. Brought it up casually. Something like, "Hey, those birds ever bother the neighbors?" He didn't even pause, didn't even think. He just said, "Don't mess with the Greshams," and walked off. Didn't even look at me. About a week later, I came home late and saw something I still can't explain. Mr. Gresham was dragging something through the grass behind the house. It was long, bulky, wrapped in an old quilt that was soaked through in spots. At first, I thought it might be a rug or furniture, but it was too limp for that. Whatever it was, it left a trail in the dirt. He hauled it up the back step and paused just before the door. Like he knew I was watching. Then he turned his head, slowly, like a hinge creaking. He saw me, and he smiled. It wasn't right. It looked forced, like he hadn't done it in years, and couldn't quite remember how. Then he yanked the bundle inside and slammed the door hard enough to shake the porch. After that, the tapping turned into pounding. Always after midnight. The frames on my walls trembled. Once, my lamp slid half an inch across the nightstand. I stopped sleeping completely. One night, I pressed my ear against the wall. I don't know what I expected. Silence, maybe. Something I could pretend was harmless. But I heard them. 2 voices. Not whispering, not talking. Chanting. Fast. Low. repeating the same lines over and over in some language I didn't recognize. It wasn't gibberish, it was structured, rhythmic, and calm. That was the worst part. That night, I slid a pocket knife under my pillow. Not because I thought it would help, just because it made me feel less helpless. Then came the last straw. One afternoon, I noticed their front door wasn't shut all the way. Just cracked, maybe an inch, like it hadn't latched. I should have gone inside. But I glanced over, and I saw in. The walls were painted black, covered in red markings, spirals, slashes, uneven symbols, like someone had been trying to write with broken fingers. The furniture was gone. In its place were rows of mason jars lined neatly across the floor. Each one held a bird, dead, wings folded, beaks open. Some were fresh, others weren't. I could smell it from the porch. Sweet, rotten, like fruit left in the sun too long. I bolted back to my car, drove to the highway gas station and slept with the engine running. The next morning, I called Taylor. She was one of the only people in Elbridge who didn't think I was imagining things. I told her I needed backup to grab a few things. Just clothes, my laptop, something. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll come." We drove back that afternoon and froze. The jars, every last one, now lined along the Gresham's porch railing, polished and clean. You could see the feathers, the dried blood, the open eyes, and the Greshams were standing behind them, still, silent, watching us. They didn't blink. Taylor whispered, "Let's go. Now." But I couldn't move. It wasn't fear. It was pressure, thick in the air, like something was holding me in place. Finally, I turned, got in the car, slammed the door. We drove away. When I first moved into that little rental house at the edge of a hollow outside Renfield, I honestly thought I was finally catching a break. You know, that kind of tired that settles in your bones after too many years of cramped apartments and a commute that turns every day into a battle. That was me. I'd spent most of my adult life stuck between traffic lights, dead-end jobs, and paper-thin walls. So when I found that listing, quiet 2-bedroom with mountain view, cheap rent, I didn't even hesitate. I signed the lease before I saw the place in person. The house itself was small, nothing fancy, but it had a wide front porch, enough room for a rocking chair or two, and the air smelled like wet dirt and pine instead of car exhaust. The hills behind the house folded into each other in this layered way, like they were keeping something tucked inside. I liked it. It felt separate, like it existed slightly outside of time. A fresh start. The house next door looked like mine, but only if mine had been left out in the rain for a couple decades too long. Same structure, same bones. But it leaned just slightly to one side, like its frame was too tired to hold itself upright anymore. The siding was bowed in spots, the paint peeling in strips, and the roof had patches of rust that glowed orange in the sun, like someone had spilled battery acid across it. What struck me first, though, were the windows. Every single one was covered. Curtains hung in rigid lines behind the glass, sealed shut like they'd been glued there. No sunlight slipped through, no movement. Just fabric pulled so tight it was hard to tell if the house was occupied or not. I figured maybe it was a rental too, or maybe some older folks who liked their privacy. Didn't think too much of it at the time, not until that first night when I was hauling boxes out of the truck. They were just sitting there, 3 people, on the porch of that sagging house, right in a row, like they were waiting for a bus that never came. They didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't even glance away when I looked straight at them. Just sat, still, eyes fixed forward, like whatever was in front of them was more important than anything else. I tried not to make it weird. Gave them a polite nod, half a wave, the usual awkward new neighbor gesture. Nothing. Not even a twitch. I thought, okay, maybe they're just shy. Or maybe they didn't see me. Or maybe this was just the kind of place where people didn't bother pretending to be friendly. But the next morning, still there. I opened my front door with a mug of coffee and stepped out into the chilly air. And there they were. Same 3 people, same chairs, same positions. I looked for signs of life movement, a cough, a head turn, but they sat there like mannequins. I raised my coffee and called out, Morning, just to see, nothing. No response, no flicker of recognition. I stood there a full 10 seconds, hand halfway raised, before I finally turned and went back inside. That's when the first little needle of unease settled under my skin. I brushed it off. Told myself it was just one of those backwoods things. People in small mountain towns didn't take to outsiders fast. I'd read about it. Maybe they were just sizing me up, trying to decide if I was worth talking to. Either way, I didn't plan to be home much, so I let it go. But the thing was, the pattern didn't break. Every single morning, without fail, they were there. I'd open the door to leave for work, and there they'd be, sitting perfectly still. I'd come back late, headlights sweeping across the front of their porch, and yep, still there. Never a light on inside their house. Never a curtain moved. Just those three figures in their chairs, facing the road. I started watching for small things. Any sign that they'd moved, even slightly. But if they did, it was only when I wasn't looking. Like they reset themselves every time I blinked. Then things started changing around my house. It began with the curtains. I'm particular about them. Grew up with a mom who was borderline obsessive about symmetry, so I always made sure mine were drawn evenly. But one morning I came out of the bedroom, and the ones in the living room were tugged to one side, not yanked. Not like wind had blown them, just subtly off-center, like someone had peeked out and didn't quite put them back the same way. Then my trash can. I'd wheel it out to the curb every Monday. Same spot. But twice in the same month I came home and it had been moved exactly 2 feet closer to the property line. Not knocked over, not disturbed, just repositioned. Precisely, like it had been measured. Then came the footprints. I'd gone out for groceries one night. It was late, maybe a little past midnight. And when I got home, my porch light was out. That alone spooked me. It had been working fine earlier. But what really stopped me were the muddy prints. 3 sets. Leading up my steps, spaced just far enough apart to suggest a careful climb. One large, one medium, one small. They ended at my door. Didn't go in. Didn't wander. Just stopped. I didn't go inside for a solid 5 minutes. Just stood there on the grass, clutching a bag of cereal and frozen peas, telling myself I was being paranoid. When I finally went in, every room was exactly how I left it. No doors open, no windows cracked, no signs of anyone or anything inside. I didn't sleep much that night either. The next day, I started asking around. At the gas station in town, I made small talk with the cashier, mentioned the house next door. He gave me a shrug and said, "They keep to themselves, wouldn't meet my eye." At a little diner on the edge of Renfield, I brought it up again. Told the waitress I was renting the place next to the one with all the curtains. She froze for a second, mid-pour. Then she quietly said, "Don't bother them." I laughed a little, trying to play it off, asked what their story was. She didn't laugh back, just said, real low, "They've always been there. They always will be." That was it, no more questions answered. From then on, something in the air shifted. Every time I stepped outside, I felt assessed, like I was being measured. Maybe not by sight, but by something else. Something patient. I'd catch myself holding my breath on the porch, glancing over at them, trying to spot a flick of movement. A cough, a blink, nothing. Then, one night, everything tipped. It was 2 in the morning. I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard before. My porch swing, squeaking, back and forth, slowly. It took me a second to register it, lying there in the dark, listening to the groan of the chains. I hadn't even used the swing once. I remember staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body locked up, just counting the creaks like maybe it would help. Back and forth, back and forth. Then it stopped. Just cut off, mid-swing. I told myself not to look. I knew I shouldn't, but I cracked the blinds anyway. The swing was empty. Still, the porch light flickered back on. But across the road, their porch was empty too. For the first time since I moved in, all 3 chairs were vacant. I didn't blink for what felt like an hour, just stood there, hand against the glass, breathing through my teeth. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Sat in the living room with the lights on, clutching the house key in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. Checking the locks every half hour. When morning finally came, I got up the nerve to look again. They were back, all 3 of them, in their places. Like nothing had happened. I didn't pack carefully. Didn't wrap dishes or label boxes. I just threw everything I could into my truck, slammed the door, and didn't look back. Not really. But as I pulled out of the driveway, I did glance in the mirror. All three of them had turned their heads. Not toward the road, toward me, toward me. I kept driving until the mountains leveled out and the trees didn't feel like they were pressing in so close. I've lived in the same mountain town my entire life. It's one of those places where the roads bend like rivers and the mountains lean in so close you start to wonder if they're listening. We're tucked so deep into a crook of the Appalachians that most people don't even know the town exists. They pass through on their way to somewhere with fewer hills and more signal bars, rolling their windows up like they can smell how long we've been here. The people who grow up in Carlin don't usually leave, not because we can't exactly, but because you're never just leaving the town. You're leaving your grandparents' land, the cemetery where your great-uncle's buried, the dirt road you first drove at 13. You leave, and it feels like you're turning your back on something older than you are. Our house sits near the bottom of a slope, across the road from the old North property. That's what people still called it, even though nobody could remember the Norths. Their house was different, set back a little farther from the road, almost hiding behind a row of dying pines. The place always looked like it was shrinking into itself, like even the wood wanted to forget it existed. No one ever said the owners' names, if they even knew them. Just the people across the road, or those ones in the old North house. I remember asking my mom once when I was little who lived there. She just said, "Folks who keep to themselves." And that was the end of it. The house was practically a ghost. The paint had peeled into long strips that fluttered when the wind blew hard enough. The porch sagged, like something had been leaning on it too long. The curtains stayed closed all year round, every single window sealed so tight you couldn't tell where the fabric ended and the dark began. The only sign of life was an old pickup that would appear out of nowhere. It sat crooked in the gravel like it had dropped from the sky. It would stay a week, maybe less, then disappear again. No one saw it come or go. It was just there, then not. Folks talked, obviously. You can't have a house like that in a town like this and not have it become a story. Theories range from old money family hiding from the world to cult, depending on who you were talking to and how many drinks they'd had. I never knew what to believe, but I always figured if something was really wrong, someone would have done something by now. Called the county, brought it up at a council meeting, but they didn't. They just let the house be, like it was some natural thing we all had to live with. For years, nothing changed. Then, one night in late October, a light came on upstairs. I was on the front porch, bundled in a blanket that smelled like cedar and smoke, sipping cold cocoa I'd forgotten about, just sort of staring at nothing. The leaves had mostly dropped by then, and the bare branches left a clear view of the house across the road. That's when I saw it. A soft yellow light flicking on behind the curtain of a second-story window. It didn't turn on fast like a bulb. It kind of swelled, like someone carrying a lantern from room to room behind the walls. I kept staring, waiting for a shape to pass in front of it. A person, a shadow, anything. But the light just floated slowly from one window to the next, and then it blinked out. I remember sitting there a long time afterward, blanket pulled tight, not even cold anymore. It wasn't scary, just weird, like the house had coughed in its sleep. I didn't say anything about it until 2 days later, when I saw someone standing in the driveway. I was walking to the store, cutting down the road like I always did, when I spotted a figure. Tall, still, standing next to the truck, facing the road, not moving. I slowed down without meaning to. The morning sun was barely up, and the light hit their face just enough to make out that it was pale. Unnaturally pale. No details. Just blank. Like someone halfway through becoming real. Instinct kicked in and I raised a hand to wave. That's just what you do here. If you see someone, you wave. Doesn't matter who it is. But they didn't wave back. They didn't even blink. I looked away for just a second, trying to shake it off, and when I looked again, the driveway was empty. Like they'd sunk into the ground. That's when the sound started. It wasn't music, wasn't a machine. It was this low hum, almost like a vibration in your chest. Sometimes it pulsed. Sometimes it held steady for hours. It came from across the hollow quiet at first, but always growing louder the longer it went on. It didn't sound like something you could make. It sounded like something that just was. Like wind or pressure or a deep note someone struck and never released. My parents swore they couldn't hear it. They thought I was stressed from school or spending too much time online, but it wasn't in my head. I'd lie there in the dark, eyes wide open, covers pulled up, and just feel the noise crawl through the walls and settle into my bones. One evening, I was heading to my friend Evan's place, decided to cut through the woods behind our house. I'd done it 100 times. But that night, when I reached the ridge overlooking the neighbor's backyard, I froze. They were out there, 5, maybe 6 people, standing in a perfect ring on the dead grass, not moving, not talking. All of them facing inward, like they were watching something in the center. I crouched down hard enough to scrape my knee on a rock and didn't move for what felt like forever. Eventually, I peeked again. They hadn't changed. It was like they were statues or trees pretending to be people. I didn't go to Evans. I turned around, walked the long way home, and didn't tell anyone what I saw. That night, just after midnight, someone knocked on our front door. It was 3 knocks. Hard, spaced out, the kind that makes you sit up fast because something in your body already knows it's not normal. My dad came out of the bedroom, eyes still half shut, and caught me in the hallway. He pushed me behind him and went to the door. Didn't look through the peephole. Didn't ask who it was, just opened it. There was nobody there. The porch was empty. The yard was still. But the hum, that awful hum, was louder than I'd ever heard it. It felt like it was crawling out of the ground itself. My dad stood there, staring out like he expected someone to step forward. But no one did. After a while, he shut the door and locked it slowly. He didn't say anything, just went back to bed. The next morning, I found the footprints. They were all through the mud by the porch. Too many to be from just one person, some small, some larger, circling the steps like someone had been pacing. The rake got left out was standing upright, propped against the railing, and the old rocking chair, Grandma's chair, had been turned to face the neighbor's house. I didn't say anything. I just cleaned it up and went inside. After that, I stopped going out after dark, at all. I kept the blinds shut, the doors locked, and my headphones on, but it didn't stop. One night, I woke up with the sense that someone was watching me. It was like a weight had settled on the room. I got up and pulled the curtain back just a little, and that's when I saw them. Across the road, the second-floor window, the same one where the light had come on, was open. Just a crack. And behind the glass, pressed against it like they'd been flattened, were faces. Not 1 or 2, a whole row of them, pale, motionless, all turned toward my room. I slammed the curtain shut so fast I nearly ripped it off the rod. I didn't look again, didn't sleep, just sat on my floor until morning, wrapped in a hoodie and holding the closest thing I could use as a weapon, a rusty old flashlight. The next day, the house was back to normal, curtain sealed, pickup gone, yard empty. Looked like nobody had lived there for decades. I was 21 when I moved into a small rental tucked deep in the mountains, outside a place called Darrow Hollow. It wasn't even on most maps. If you blinked during the drive, you'd miss the only stoplight and the post office, which doubled as the general store. It was the kind of town where every face looked familiar, but no one bothered to introduce themselves. The house I found was dirt cheap, almost suspiciously cheap, just 1 floor, faded green paint peeling from the siding, a porch that leaned like it had 1 bad leg, and a wide view of the ridgeline cutting across the sky like a scar. I didn't care that it looked ready to collapse in the next big wind. I wasn't moving there for luxury. I needed out, away from people, away from expectations, quiet in space. That was the goal. The road was gravel, barely maintained. A dozen houses, maybe, scattered along the slope. Some so overgrown I couldn't tell if anyone lived there. The ones I could see all looked older than mine by at least 50 years. They seemed poured into the hills like they belonged to the earth. No one waved. No hellos. No hellos. Just silence pressing in from every side. Frank, my landlord, was wiry and sun-worn, with a voice rough enough to peel paint. He handed me the keys without much ceremony. Then he offered one piece of advice. Folks out here ain't like city people. He said it with a half smile, but his eyes didn't match. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, the couple next door, they're a little different. I didn't press him. Figured he meant they were reclusive. I wasn't there to make friends anyway. I just nodded, took the keys, and drove the last stretch up to the house, telling myself this was it. Peace and quiet. The first time I saw the neighbors, I was unloading boxes. I turned, arms full of books, and they were just standing on their porch, both of them. No footsteps, no sound, just there. The man looked weathered, with sharp cheekbones and a wiry frame, the kind that comes from a lifetime of hard labor. The woman was pale, with long black hair braided tight against her neck. She wore an old-fashioned dress, out of place even for the mountains. Neither of them smiled. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't offer help. The man just asked, flat and toneless, "What brings you out here?" Before I could finish answering, the woman cut in. "Do you live alone?" The way she asked it didn't feel nosy. It felt like confirmation. I nodded without thinking and regretted it immediately. They turned in perfect sync and walked off the porch. No goodbye. No glance back. I laughed it off later. Told myself it was awkward small-town etiquette. Maybe they were just suspicious of newcomers. Still, I checked the locks twice before bed. After midnight, I woke to a dragging sound on the porch. Something heavy scraping across the boards. Slow. Steady. I peeked through the front window. My trash bin was pressed against the house. That might not sound strange, but I hadn't moved it. It was still by the shed earlier. I hadn't even unpacked enough to make trash. No wind, no animals, just there. The next week brought more signs. Their curtains never opened, but movement flickered behind them when I stepped outside. Once, I saw their storm door crack open, then slam shut as if someone had changed their mind. I tried waving once, caught them at the window, raised my hand. They just stared, unblinking, until I retreated inside. Then things shifted from unsettling to disturbing. Mail started appearing on my porch before the mail truck even arrived. My shed tools were laid out in neat lines across the yard, edge to edge like someone had used a ruler. I locked the shed after that. But the next morning the lock was intact and the tools were stacked neatly against my back door. That's when I stopped feeling seen and started feeling studied. I spent more time in town just to be around people, but I noticed there were no kids. Not at the diner, not the grocery store, not even at the park. Only adults. All of them carrying the same tired, heavy secret in their eyes. One night I woke to the sound of footsteps in the gravel. Slow, steady, circling the house. I pulled back the curtain an inch. She was standing in the yard, the neighbor's wife. Barefoot, draped in a thin white nightgown. Head tilted back, eyes locked on my window. She didn't blink, didn't move. I sat on the floor, heart pounding, until the sun came up. By then, she was gone. After that, I avoided them at all costs. Changed grocery days, ran errands early. It didn't help. They started showing up wherever I went. At the store, they followed me through aisles. No carts, no baskets, just silent footsteps behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned, so did they. Once, I ducked into the bathroom. When I came back out, they were waiting by the door. I mentioned it to the cashier, Dylan, who barely looked up. "That's just how they are," he muttered. Like that explained anything. The last night in that house, everything broke. I came home close to midnight. Headlights swept across the front, and I slammed the brakes. Every window was wide open. Every door stood ajar, like the house had exhaled. Inside, nothing was stolen, nothing broken, but everything was rearranged. Drawers pulled out, contents sorted in piles on the floor. My clothes folded, books laid across the rug, alphabetized and color-coded. Pantry items lined in rows along the counter. It felt like someone had spent hours touching every part of my life. The air was still, the silence thick, but I knew someone had just slipped out the back. I didn't sleep, didn't even sit. I grabbed a bag, stuffed what I could, and walked straight to the car. Locked the doors, started the engine, drove. I parked in front of Frank's office downtown and waited. When he arrived at dawn, he didn't ask why, didn't look surprised when I said I needed to break the lease. He just handed me a form and said, "Best to go." I never went back for the rest of my things. The first time I noticed something off about my neighbors, I was hauling firewood from the shed out back. Just a regular evening. It was starting to get cold, and I figured I'd better stockpile enough to make it through the weekend without stumbling outside in my pajamas. I'd only been in that rental house a week. It sat right off a narrow dirt road that curved into a wooded hill. Real quiet place, too quiet honestly, coming from a louder part of the state. The kind of town where folks wave from their porches, whether they know you or not. So when people warned me, kind of offhand, that the folks across the road kept to themselves, I didn't think much of it. Everybody's got their reasons. Their house wasn't remarkable. A sagging front porch, faded blue-gray siding that looked like it hadn't seen paint in a decade, lace curtains always drawn tight. You could barely make out the inside. Even during the day, the whole place had that weather-beaten, half-forgotten look. But so did half the houses in that stretch of Appalachia. What made theirs different was how still it seemed. Like, too still. I know that sounds dramatic, but really, every other house had something. A dog barking, a porch light flicking on, the clank of someone stacking junk in the yard. Their place? Nothing. Not even wind in the curtains. I started to feel like the air around their house didn't move. The first time I really felt weird about it was maybe 4 days in. I was walking past, headed back from the mailbox, and for just a second, I saw one of the curtains shift. Not much, just the slightest ripple. But the timing was too perfect. It happened right as I passed, like someone had been watching me and yanked back too late. I paused mid-step, looked straight at the window. Nothing. Just that heavy curtain again. Still as stone. I laughed a little to myself. One of those dry, okay, you're losing it laughs. I shook it off and kept walking. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. From then on, every time I went out, I caught myself glancing across the road, checking the windows without meaning to. Most days, there was nothing to see. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'd swear I felt someone's eyes on me. Not in a horror movie way. More like that feeling you get when someone across a crowded room is staring at the back of your head, not visible, just present. Then one night, while I was stacking more firewood, I looked up, and there was definitely a face in the window. Not a trick of the light, not a vague shadow, a face. It wasn't pressed to the glass or anything, it was just there, staring through a tiny gap in the curtain. No movement, no blinking. It stayed long enough for me to register it fully, before the curtain slipped back into place. Smooth, precise. I raised my hand, polite wave, trying not to look like a creeper. No response, just silence. No footsteps, no door creaking open. Nothing. That silence stuck with me longer than I expected. I kept trying to be rational. Maybe they were just cautious. Maybe they'd had a break-in before, didn't trust strangers. Or maybe they were just plain weird. We've all had strange neighbors. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Until the jar showed up. It was sitting on my front step when I got home from work. A glass mason jar, old-looking. Rust on the lid's edges. Inside, a black feather, pinned upright, like someone had taken real care placing it there. No note, no tape, no explanation. It gave me pause. Not in a terrifying way, more like a "what the hell is this" kind of pause. I looked around, no one nearby. The road was empty. The woods were quiet. I stood there holding it for a good minute, then set it down on the porch rail. Figured maybe it was a weird local tradition, a welcome gift with strange taste. I decided to ask. I walked over to the neighbor's house and knocked. Not too aggressive, just enough to be heard. No answer. Waited, knocked again. Still nothing. I was about to turn around when I heard movement inside. Not footsteps, more like shifting weight. More than one person. A synchronized shuffle maybe. I froze, but no one came to the door, so I left. Not angrily, just unsettled. The next morning there was a new jar waiting. This one had a piece of string tied into a perfect little noose, coiled just right. It sat exactly where the last one had been, like it had replaced it in a lineup. And something about that felt poignant. I stared at it for a while, tried to laugh it off, but my throat was dry. I picked it up, brought it inside, and left it on the counter. Just another odd thing to process later. That night, after brushing my teeth, I happened to glance out the bathroom window. The jar was back on the porch, exactly where I'd found it that morning. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe I moved the wrong one. Maybe there were two jars. But deep down, I knew. I hadn't touched it since bringing it inside. I walked into the kitchen. The counter was empty. The jar I'd brought in, gone. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not full panic. Not yet. But a realization. Something here didn't follow the usual rules. The next evening, I was done with subtlety. I went across the road and knocked hard. 3 sharp raps. The door opened a crack. Just an inch or two. A man's voice came through. "You should be careful about touching what isn't yours." Then the door clicked shut. That was it. I didn't sleep that night. Sat on the edge of my bed, lights off, ears straining for every sound outside. Around midnight, I heard dragging noises. Long, slow drags, like someone pulling something heavy through dry leaves. I got up, crossed to the living room, peeked out. 4 figures were crouched along the fence. Their movements were jerky, not natural at all. Limbs bent in directions that made my stomach turn. Elbows too high, knees twisted the wrong way. They weren't walking, they were crawling, fast and low, like insects wearing clothes. I ducked behind the curtain, didn't move until the sky started to lighten. Morning came. I opened the door and froze. 10 jars, lined up in a perfect circle on the porch. Each held something different: strands of hair, bits of fabric, a cracked tooth, a child's mitten. One even had a small animal bone, curved and polished. I didn't recognize any of it. I didn't touch them, just backed up. Shut the door, called the sheriff. He showed up about 30 minutes later. All business. I let him outside. There wasn't a single jar. Nothing. Clean porch. No marks. No signs anything had ever been there. He gave me that look, half polite concern, half suspicion. Said maybe it was just teenagers screwing around. But I knew better. That night, I didn't pretend I could sleep. Turned off all the lights. Sat in the dark by the window. Watching. Waiting. Hours passed. Then, just after 3, they were back. 4 figures. Standing in the middle of the road, upright this time. Still. Completely still. They were facing the house, not moving, not breathing, as far as I could tell. Just there. My whole body went rigid. Then one of them lifted its hand, slowly, pressed it forward into the air, palm flat, like it was testing a surface I couldn't see. It didn't move like a person. Too fluid, too smooth. My heart hammered so hard, I thought it might shake the window glass. That was it. I grabbed my coat and ran out the back door, barefoot, straight into the woods. Didn't think about the cold. Didn't stop to grab a bag or shoes. I sprinted the whole 2 miles to the gas station on the edge of town. The guy working the night shift didn't ask a single question. I must have looked like hell. I told him I needed to leave, didn't care where, just away. I moved to this tiny town, nestled deep in the Appalachian hills, a place where I could catch my breath and maybe stop feeling like I was constantly running late for something. I found the house on a rental site that looked like it hadn't been updated since the days of dial-up internet. 2 stories, slanted porch, paint peeling like sunburned skin. The pictures weren't great, but the price? Ridiculously low. I figured it couldn't be that bad. Worst case, I'd patch it up, mind my business, and stay just long enough to save for somewhere better. Nettlewood Lane. That was the name of the street, though you'd miss the sign if you blinked. Only 6 houses total, all lined up like kids huddled in a dark hallway, quiet, tight together, like they were trying not to draw attention to themselves. It was a weekday when I arrived. Tuesday, I think. And within hours of the moving truck pulling up, I'd already met nearly every neighbor. That probably sounds sweet. In most towns, that'd be called a warm welcome. Except, it wasn't. First came an older couple from across the street. They brought a pie rhubarb, I think. The woman wore a cardigan, even though it was warm out. Her husband just smiled too much. They both did, really, smiling like they'd been waiting for this exact moment, like it was part of some ritual. Their eyes never left my face, not even when I looked away. Then there was the guy next door, Reed, I think his name was. Mid-40s, tall, buzz cut, wire-rimmed glasses. He leaned against the chain-link fence while I hauled boxes inside, casually calling out what was in each one, like he'd already seen me pack them. "Books," he said as I walked by with a box. Then, clothes. Kitchenware. He chuckled every time he guessed right, which was every time. And not just vague stuff either. One time he said, "Mugs from college." That box had a chipped Syracuse coffee mug inside. I laughed it off. Told myself they were just good guesses. Maybe the boxes were labeled and I didn't notice. Maybe Reed was just quirky. People like that exist. Small towns are full of eccentric characters, right? But the friendly neighbor thing didn't stop. It didn't taper off after the first day like you'd expect. No, they kept showing up. Constantly. If I opened the front door for a smoke or to check the mail, someone was across the street. Just standing, waving, always waving, like it was a reflex. If I walked down the road to clear my head, I'd hear footsteps. And without fail, one of the neighbors would appear a few feet behind me. No hellos. No small talk. They'd just fall into step beside me, like we were old friends on a stroll. I started cutting through people's yards, just to avoid the road. Didn't matter. They'd still find me, like they always knew where I was. And the weirdest part, I never saw anyone leave. Not once. No cars starting, no one running errands. Their driveways looked untouched, like the cars were just for show. 3 days in, things got worse. I went to roll out my trash cans and found they'd already been moved, tucked neatly back against the side of the house. I hadn't touched them since I moved in. Inside were bags tied in these impossibly tight knots. So tight I had to saw one open with scissors. The bag was heavy, way too heavy for trash. When I lifted it, I felt something solid shift inside. No smell, no visible mess, but definitely not kitchen waste. It felt wrong, like I was holding something I wasn't supposed to touch. I dragged them back to the curb and left them there. Next morning, they were gone. Not just emptied, scrubbed clean. No residue, no marks, like they'd never been used. That same week, I caught the old couple in my yard at night. I'd been watching TV, went to close the curtains, and there they were, standing side by side, holding hands, heads tilted up toward my window, not moving, not talking, just standing. I backed away from the glass, tried to shake it off. Maybe they were confused, maybe dementia. But 5 minutes later, I peeked again, still there, same posture, same blank expressions. Only now, they weren't looking at the house. They were looking at something just above it. That's when I stopped sleeping properly. Every creak in the walls felt too intentional. I started locking every door, then checking them again an hour later. I even jammed a chair under the back doorknob like in movies. Didn't matter. Little things kept happening. The back door latch shifted. A kitchen chair moved half a foot from where I left it. My mail, usually stacked neatly on the counter, was spread across the dining table one night. Every envelope had been sliced open with something sharp, then sealed again with precision. No jagged tears, just smooth, clean cuts. By the end of the week, I was barely functioning. Sleep came in 20-minute bursts. I kept a duffel bag packed beside the bed. Essentials only: phone, charger, cash, backup keys. I didn't know what I was preparing for. I just needed to feel like I could leave instantly. Then came that night. Maybe 2 in the morning. I woke up without knowing why. Something yanked me out of sleep, like a hook in the chest. I lay there, breathing shallow, listening. That's when I heard it, murmuring. Dozens of soft voices, rising through the walls like water through cracks. At first, I couldn't make out words. Just low, steady hums, almost chanting. But then I heard my name, clear, repeated. They were whispering my name, over and over, testing the shape of it with their mouths. I didn't breathe, didn't move. My skin felt cold and tight, like it didn't fit right. The whispers didn't stop. They slowed down, grew more deliberate, like they were savoring it. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my bag. Barefoot, I moved down the stairs. The house felt off, like the walls were listening. I didn't turn on the lights, just unlocked the front door as quietly as I could, eased it open, stepped outside. That's when I saw them. Every neighbor I'd met, plus several I hadn't, stood in a perfect semicircle at the edge of my yard, shoulder to shoulder, still as statues. The porch light caught their faces. No smiles, no frowns, just blank expressions. Not empty, blank. Like something wearing a human face, but not bothering to animate it. None of them moved. They didn't speak. They didn't blink. They just waited. That was enough. I didn't stop to lock up, didn't turn off the lights, didn't grab anything else. I just ran to my car, jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands, and drove. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, not once. I kept going until I hit the highway, didn't slow down until the mountains were behind me. We had just moved, my parents, my younger sister, and me, from a noisy little suburb outside Charleston to this out-of-the-way town, somewhere in the Appalachian hills. The kind of place where you lose cell service halfway in and don't really get it back. Honestly, I didn't even know it existed until we were already pulling up in a U-Haul, bumping down a dirt road that looked more like a deer path than anything you'd call residential. I remember the first thing I noticed was how narrow everything felt. The hills pressed in like the town had been squeezed into a fold of the mountains and forgotten. Sunlight didn't really hit our yard until late morning, and it started to fade way earlier than it should have. It gave the whole place this weird, half-lit feeling, like we were always on the edge of dusk, even at noon. Our house was at the end of a curling gravel road. Not even gravel really, mostly packed dirt, with patches of stone like someone had tried to fix the ruts, then gave up. There weren't any street signs. Our mailbox was just a dented metal box propped on a slanted wooden post. It leaned a little, like it was too tired to stand up straight. The only other house in sight sat just across a narrow stretch of woods, maybe 50 yards away, maybe 100. It was hard to tell because the trees blurred the line. That house, it looked like it had been abandoned more than once. A sagging roof, grayish boards that might have been white long ago, windows covered in heavy old curtains that never moved, ever. It had this slouch to it like time had pushed down for so long, it eventually gave in. I got a weird feeling from it right away. Not loud alarm bells, just that low, unsettled churn in your stomach that you can't explain. Like something about it didn't sit right, even though nothing was obviously wrong. We spent the first few days unpacking, swatting away mosquitoes, trying not to trip on tree roots in the yard. My mom was excited. My dad acted like it was some kind of fresh start. I just felt removed, like I was floating just outside the experience, watching it all unfold, but not really part of it. Then I noticed the faces. At first, it was quick. I'd glance up from the porch or from my bedroom window, and I'd see movement in the house across the woods, curtains shifting, a shape behind the glass. But the second I looked directly, it vanished. No lights ever came on, no cars in the driveway. Just those slow, sneaky glances through the curtains, always catching me when I wasn't trying to look. It happened enough that I started keeping track. Nothing formal. Just mental notes. Morning, late afternoon, just before dark. Always the same kind of movement, like they were watching us settle in, studying us. One evening, I was sitting on our porch with a soda in one hand, scrolling through old photos on my phone, just trying to feel connected to something that wasn't quiet and dirt. The air was sticky, but not unbearable. Just the usual summer heaviness. I remember thinking it was finally starting to feel calm. Then their screen door creaked. It was loud enough that I heard it from across the trees. I looked up and there he was. This man, tall, wiry, bones practically visible through faded denim overalls. He didn't walk like a regular person. It was slow, careful, like every step was being measured. He stopped at the edge of his yard, barely visible between two trees, and then he just stared. Not curious, not cautious, just blank. I gave a hesitant half wave, more to break the tension than anything. He didn't react, didn't blink, just kept staring for what felt like forever. Eventually, he turned and walked back into the house. Didn't speak, didn't speed up, just let the door slam shut behind him, like punctuation. That night, I found something in our mailbox. I'd gone to check it before dinner. Inside, sitting right on top of a flyer for tractor parts, was a small collection of objects. a bundle of brittle twigs tied with fraying string, a beetle lying on its back, legs curled tight like it had been dead for days, and a single marble, cloudy, scratched, the kind a kid might have played too rough with. I stared at them for a while before touching anything. Then I scooped them up, careful not to drop the beetle, and brought them inside. My parents were sitting at the table halfway through dinner. I set the stuff down and said this was in the mailbox. They looked over. My mom wrinkled her nose. My dad let out a dry laugh. Probably just some kids being weird, he said, going back to his plate. Hill towns are full of that kind of stuff, but there were no kids around, not that I'd seen. No toys in yards, no bikes, no chalk drawings, no sign that children lived nearby at all. That night, I didn't sleep well. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up choking on panic. My mouth was dry, my hands were shaking. I didn't even know why at first, then I noticed it. The tapping, soft, uneven. At first, I thought it was a tree branch, but there wasn't any wind, and the pattern was wrong. Too deliberate, not rhythmic, not random, just off. I got up, walked slowly to my window, and pulled the curtain aside. My stomach dropped. There were handprints smeared across the glass, muddy, small, unevenly spaced, like someone had been crawling or kneeling. They weren't old. The mud was still wet, sliding down in places like fingerprints. I backed away, grabbed my desk chair, shoved it under the knob, even though the window was locked or had been locked. The next day, I walked straight across the road. The trees didn't look thick from the house, but walking through them felt like threading a needle. I could barely see where I was going. The dirt underfoot was dry and soft. At one point, I swear I heard something scurry just out of sight. Their porch groaned when I stepped on it. I knocked. Once, twice. No answer. On the third knock, the door creaked open, just an inch. Darkness inside. Not pitch black, but like no lights had been on in days. I couldn't see anyone, but I heard her. A woman's voice. Low, quiet. Quiet. You should leave before dark. Her tone wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to scare me. It sounded like a warning, like someone telling you not to drive a road with no guardrails. What? I asked, stepping forward. I tried to see her face, but the door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the wood. I stood there for a minute, then walked back to my house without looking behind me once. That night was worse. The tapping came back, then footsteps, slow, steady, pacing across the front porch, not scurrying, not running, just deliberate steps, back and forth, like someone waiting. When I peeked through the curtain, I froze. 3 figures stood in the yard, lined up perfectly, 2 tall, 1 small. Their shoulders touched. Their faces were turned directly toward the house. They didn't speak, didn't sway, didn't even blink. I remember how my body locked up, every muscle tense, like I was holding myself together by force. My dad burst out of his room, saw the look on my face, yanked the door open. The yard was empty, not even a footprint left behind. After that, none of us pretended anymore. 2 nights later, I woke up choking on panic, mouth dry, hands shaking. I didn't know why. Then I saw it. The window, wide open. I had locked it. I know I had locked it. On my desk, right in the center, was a square piece of folded paper, crisp edges. Like someone had taken their time, I opened it with clumsy fingers. 3 words. Shaky pencil. We see you. That broke something in me. Whatever calm I'd been clinging to, snapped. When my parents said we were leaving, I didn't pack. I stuffed. Clothes, books, whatever I could grab. We weren't even done loading the truck when I felt it again. That feeling. Like something was watching from the woods. From the woods. We pulled out before sunrise. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I don't know what was in that house, or what they were trying to do, but I know we got out just in time. If we'd stayed, I don't think I'd be here telling you this. I was 28 when I moved into that rundown rental at the edge of a tiny town in the Appalachian hills. It wasn't the kind of place you show off to friends. The paint was chipped. The wood floors groaned even if you stood perfectly still. The roof was patched with tin sheets that rattled whenever the wind picked up just right, but it was cheap. The lease was month to month, and the porch faced the road with just enough yard to feel like it was mine. After a few rough months in the city, I needed something slower, quieter, a place where no one knew me, where I could breathe without bumping into anyone I used to know. I figured a house tucked into a narrow valley, shaded by enough trees to keep the sun off the windows in the morning, would be just right. My closest neighbors lived directly across the road. Their place looked like it hadn't changed since the Civil War, weather-beaten, slightly leaning, like it had given up on standing straight but hadn't quite decided to fall. I barely started unpacking when they crossed the road to introduce themselves, Harold and May. Harold was tall and angular, the kind of man who looked like he never filled out after high school. His skin had that thin, papery look older folks get, but somehow he seemed ageless. His hands stayed clasped behind his back the whole time, like he was hiding something or didn't trust his arms. May had a softness to her, round cheeks, a flower print dress, apron strings still tied, but her smile stretched too wide, and she didn't blink as much as she should. Her voice was sweet, too sweet, like tea left out too long in the sun. They introduced themselves like hosts at a block party, and I was the guest of honor. Asked where I came from, what I did for work, and then, as if rehearsed, they both asked the same question. "You here by yourself?" Harold asked it first, casually with a half smile. May echoed it just before they turned to leave. Same words, same tone. Not curious, more like hopeful. I brushed it off. Small towns are nosy, that's part of the deal. But in the days that followed, it became clear. This wasn't just neighborly interest. They were always outside. Always. But never really doing anything. If I stepped onto the porch with coffee, May would be by her hydrangeas, hands on her hips, like she'd just finished gardening, but the yard never changed. If I walked to the mailbox, Harold would appear by the fence, lighting a cigarette that didn't burn. It got under my skin, slowly. I'd pretend not to notice. But every time I looked up, one of them was already looking at me. Not waving, not talking, just watching. A week after I moved in, May brought over a casserole. She didn't knock, just opened the screen door like she owned the place and handed it to me, wrapped in a towel so thin it did nothing to block the heat burning my hands. I blinked, caught off guard. Before I could speak, she leaned in. Not nosy exactly, more like she was checking something off a list. She peeked past me into the living room. "Cozy little place," she said, even though she hadn't seen more than 5 feet inside. Then came the question again. "You're here all by yourself?" I nodded. "Yeah, just me," she hummed. Like that answer settled something. Then stepped back, letting the door swing shut behind her. I stood there for a while, casserole in hand, door half open. I didn't like the way she asked, or how she didn't wait to be invited in. I set the casserole on the counter and forgot about it. Later that night, I remembered it. Figured I might as well try a bite. I lifted the lid, and the smell hit me like a punch. It wasn't just spoiled, it smelled wrong. Metallic, sharp, like blood in an old drain. I didn't look twice. Tossed the whole thing in the trash bin out back, left the dish on the porch. Next morning, it was gone, scrubbed clean, sitting neatly on the top step. After that, things started to shift inside the house. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A chair pulled farther than I remembered. Mail looked like someone had flipped through it. A glass I left in the sink, dry, sitting on the counter. Then it got worse. One evening, I came home from work with my keys in hand. The door was unlocked. Not just unlatched, unlocked. I always locked it. Double-checked, every time. No signs of entry. No damage. Just open. I installed a second lock. Then a third. Started leaving lights on in every room before I left. But the feeling didn't go away. Some nights, I'd catch myself holding my breath just to hear better, waiting for a sound I couldn't name. I checked windows, left the radio on low like it might cover whatever else was listening. Then one night, something woke me. I don't know what. Just a shift. I got out of bed barefoot and went to the window, pulled the blind down a few inches. Harold was in my yard, just standing there, Not near the porch, not by the road. Halfway between the house and the trees. Still, facing away from me, like he was listening to something in the dark. I watched him for what felt like forever. Then I stepped outside, called his name, trying to sound annoyed, not scared. He turned his head slowly, too slowly, like it wasn't quite attached right, looked at me, then gave a lazy little wave and walked back across the road. Next morning, May waved like always. Same wide smile, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't seen her husband in my yard at midnight. A couple weeks later, a friend from work, Cass, stopped by. She'd borrowed a wrench. As she was leaving, she gave me this weird look and said, "By the way, May told me you're her cousin's kid. Said you're staying here till you get back on your feet?" I froze. "What?" Cass shrugged. "Yeah, distant cousin or something." That's what she said. I hadn't told anyone in town a thing about my family. No one knew where I was from. That night, I didn't sleep. Sat by the window with the lights off, watching. Their house was lit up, curtains thin, windows wide. I could see almost everything. Harold and May sat on the couch, side by side, silent. Behind them, the back wall was covered in framed photos. Dozens. I leaned in, squinting. Some were blurry, like taken in a rush. Most were strangers. And then, near the center, I saw it. Me. Mid-step, coffee in hand, mailbox open. My mouth open like I was singing or talking to myself. I never posed for that photo, never knew it was taken. That was it. I was done. Next morning, I didn't shower, didn't eat. Just grabbed every trash bag I had and stuffed it full. Clothes still damp from the dryer. Plates left in the sink. Didn't lock the door. When I stepped outside with the first bag, May was standing there, at the edge of her yard, not smiling, not saying a word, just watching. I didn't look at her, didn't wave, just tossed the bag into the car. When I came back for more, Harold was next to her. Same spot, still as stone. They didn't blink, didn't move. I slammed the trunk, got in the car, locked the doors, started the engine. Gravel sprayed as I backed out fast. In the mirror, they were still standing there, watching, until the curve in the road took them out of sight. I didn't take the highway, didn't want them following. I drove deeper into the hills, winding through roads with no names. The GPS gave up. I didn't. I kept driving until the gas light came on. I'm 32 years old. When I moved out to that little town tucked into the Appalachian hills, I really thought I was buying peace. Not just quiet, but real peace. The kind that sits in your chest and doesn't buzz with anxiety all the time. I'd been living in a city that never shut up. Sirens every hour, traffic crawling under my window, upstairs neighbors who acted like furniture had to be dragged instead of lifted. Even when I was alone, it never felt still. My whole life was just tension and noise. So when I saw the listing online, cheap rent, big trees, no neighbors stacked 10 feet above me, I jumped on it. The photos showed this small, crooked-looking house with faded siding and a porch that leaned a little too far forward, like it was listening in on the road. But the place had character. It was perched halfway up a ridge, and the road that led there started paved, but gave up about halfway, turning to gravel and then mostly dirt. That felt like a good sign. Like the town didn't care about appearances. I liked that. There were maybe 5 or 6 houses on my stretch of road, all slouched into their own clearings as if they'd sprouted there naturally. Most looked tired but lived in. A few seemed abandoned, with windows too dark and porches caving inward. Mine was one of the better-looking ones, which isn't saying much, but still, it felt like it could be home. The town itself was small, not even a full stoplight. One gas station, a diner with a flickering sign, and a post office that closed before 3. People waved when they saw me, but no one came close. They'd nod, raise a hand, then keep moving. The kind of friendly that never crosses the fence line. At first, I appreciated that. After years of forced small talk with apartment neighbors, the silence felt respectful, like everyone just minded their own. Then I met the couple across the road. Their house sat directly opposite mine, though the trees between us tried to pretend otherwise. It was a sagging white 2-story, paint curling off the walls like old skin. The shutters hung lopsided, and the porch looked like it might collapse under a strong breeze. I hadn't seen much movement over there my first day, just a flicker behind a window curtain. But on the second afternoon, they came over. She wore a faded green dress that hit just above her ankles, and she was barefoot, which struck me because the gravel driveway couldn't have felt great. In her hands was a mason jar filled with something murky. I could tell right away it was beans, but the liquid they floated in was thick and cloudy, like the water had gone bad. The jar was sealed with wax, old school. He stood behind her, a step or two back, tall, pale, arms dangling like he hadn't figured out how elbows worked. His eyes didn't blink much, and they stayed fixed on me the whole time, not in a curious way. More like he was cataloging me. She smiled wide, too wide, like her face didn't understand where to stop. "Welcome," she said. Her voice was flat, like she practiced the line too many times. "We like to greet new folks proper." I smiled back and took the jar from her hands. It was cold and heavier than I expected. I mumbled something about how thoughtful that was. She just kept smiling. Then they turned and walked back across the road. No chit-chat, no questions. No, "Where'd you move from?" Just, "Done." I set the jar on a kitchen shelf and never touched it again. Every time I walked past, the beans seemed to shift, float differently. I told myself it was nothing, just the liquid settling. But the more I looked, the more wrong it felt. Like the jar wasn't made for giving. Like it had been stored too long. I figured that would be it. Weird neighbors, sure, but harmless. People have their own ways, especially out in the mountains. Then they started standing outside. Not both at once, always just one. They'd be right at the edge of their yard, standing there not moving, not doing yard work, not smoking or talking on a phone, just watching. Sometimes it was her in that same green dress. Sometimes him, always in boots and a long-sleeved shirt, no matter the heat. They wouldn't flinch when cars passed, wouldn't look away. If I happened to glance over, they'd lift a hand in the slowest wave I've ever seen, like their arms were moving through syrup. No smile, no nod, just the wave. And they stayed there until I went inside. After a few days of that, I started keeping my curtains closed. It felt silly, like I was playing into some dumb local tradition. But it made my skin crawl to have them just standing there. I drink coffee and check the window and find one of them already in place, like they never went to bed. Then the rock started. One morning, I stepped outside and saw 3 flat gray stones stacked on my top step. They were smooth, almost perfectly round, arranged deliberately. I stared at them, trying to decide if it meant something. Eventually, I picked them up and tossed them into the yard. The next morning, 5 more, then 7. Always an odd number, always stacked. I never heard anyone walk up to the porch at night, and the gravel should have made noise. One afternoon, I caught the woman hanging laundry and decided to just ask. "Hey," I called across the road. "You wouldn't know anything about the rocks, would you?" She turned slowly, like her neck didn't want to obey. That same too-wide smile crawled back onto her face. "That's just how we say good morning here," she said. Before I could respond, the man came out onto their porch. He didn't say a thing, just stood there, staring. His eyes dropped to my hands, then my chest, then lingered at my throat. He turned around and went back inside like the whole exchange hadn't happened. I stopped asking after that. But the rocks didn't stop. By the time October rolled in, I found them every morning, sometimes in stacks, sometimes laid out in trails, leading across my porch to the door. Like something wanted in, and then things started shifting inside the house. I'd leave for work, make sure everything was locked, and come home to small changes. A lamp turned slightly, a drawer not quite closed, curtains pulled open when I knew they'd been drawn. I thought I was losing it. I tried setting up little tests, placing a book at an angle, marking the spot of a chair leg. Every time, something was off. Subtle, but off. One night, I poured a glass of water before bed and left it on the table. In the morning, it was gone. Not spilled, just gone. I found the glass washed and dry in the cabinet. I stopped trying to explain it. Then came the night I saw someone inside. I was just getting home, keys in hand, when I glanced at the living room window and saw movement. A figure, just a blur, slipping past the curtain. I froze on the porch. My whole body went cold. My first instinct wasn't to call the police. It was to not go inside. Like maybe if I waited long enough, whatever it was would leave. But I made myself do it. I unlocked the door, stepped in, and found everything perfectly in place, except for the smell. The whole living room reeked, not rotten but wet and earthy, like moss after rain, mixed with something metallic. I opened the windows, but it clung to the walls like it had soaked in. That night, I slept with every light on. A few nights later, I woke up to footsteps, heavy ones. They circled the porch once, then stopped under my bedroom window. I held my phone in one hand, gripping it so hard my knuckles ached. I didn't dare move, didn't breathe. The boards creaked under the weight of whoever was out there. Then, nothing. When the silence stretched too long, I peeked. No one. Porch empty. Yard still. But I didn't sleep again. And then came November. I was turning off lights for the night when I saw them through the window, both of them, standing at the edge of the yard. She had a lantern, an old iron thing that threw shadows across her face. Her smile had grown grotesque, all gums and teeth. He held something wrapped in thick cloth, heavy enough that he had to brace his legs to keep it steady. They didn't wave, didn't move, just stared. I backed away from the window and called the sheriff. A deputy came by, walked the property, and said he didn't see anything. No footprints in the frost, no lantern light, no signs anyone had been there. Said they were just old-timers, probably eccentric, and I should get a dog if it kept bothering me. I decided to leave. Took a few weeks to set things up, but my mind was made up. I started packing. I slept with a bat beside my bed. Every morning, another rock. Some days on my truck, once in my mailbox. One morning, lined up along the windowsill of my bedroom, 3 perfect stones, balanced like they'd been placed from the roof. The morning I left, I loaded my car until it was crammed full. Did one last sweep of the house, left the key where the landlord asked. When I came back outside, the road was still. Their house looked boarded up. Nothing moved. Then I opened the driver's side door and stopped. Right there on the seat, resting like it belonged, was a single river stone, perfectly smooth, round as a coin. I didn't think. Just picked it up, walked to the edge of the woods, and threw it as hard as I could. I waited to hear it land. Nothing. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove until the trees thinned out and the ridge disappeared behind me.